Well, Anna Meares, welcome to Play Fearless.
Thanks, Dan.
Let's go through some stats, shall we?
Yes.
4-time Olympian, 2-time Olympic champion, 11-time world champion, world record holder numerous times. We're not entirely sure how many times. And now chef de mission of the Australian Olympic team. And I just wondered, if you could just bring us into the picture, bring us into your world about what the role of the chef de mission of the Australian Olympic team, what does that entail?
Yeah, well, excuse me. Well, basically it's leading the Australian Olympic team at games time. And that doesn't just mean that 1 month period when I'm on ground at Paris in the 17 days of competition. It's a 2-year appointment. It's spending time to build relationships with sports and athletes and coaches and high performance directors, understanding what sports need so that I can replicate for them that environment when they come into the grounds of Paris and the villages that we have over there, to be a support mechanism. Right? I don't want to create barriers for them. I want to be the best support mechanism as possible. And then to do that, I work with my, excuse me, to do that, I work with my team and my staff at the AOC to provide that. And largely, I'm the spokesperson for the team. So anything that happens, good, bad, or indifferent, I speak to, and I'm the only person to speak for the team. So it's a big team. We're looking at about 460 athletes. They will have about 350 of their own support staff, everything from coaches to psychologists to strength and conditioners to whatever staff member requires them to have the best performance day at the Olympic Games. And then I'll have about 150 of my own HQ staff to support those staff and athletes.
Having been to 4 Olympic Games yourself, what does it mean to you to hold that role, to be the leader of this team, for want of a better way of thinking about it? Like, what does that mean to you?
It's a real honor. Like, I really feel like I pinch myself. One, because I feel like it's the best job in the world. I think it's going to have some of the hardest moments at games time, I'm sure, to come. But I just feel like it lends a platform to do something positive for the next generation of athletes. And I have some pretty good insights and experience from an athletic point of view, but also my eyes have been enormously opened to the amount of people it takes behind the scenes that I had no idea to make a games environment as stress-free as possible. And those people did a really good job, clearly, because I had no idea and I was able to focus on my task, which was to be that athlete. But it's just, I feel so glad to be around a team again of like-minded, motivated, driven people who are passionate about what they do and get up every single day to help someone else. And that just motivates me immensely. Yeah,
I think we might touch on elements of that later in our chat, but I'm getting the sense there that between sort of retiring from cycling and taking up the chef de mission role, you didn't have that. You didn't have that like-minded group of people really driven. So I'd be curious to dig into that perhaps later on. But let's rewind then. So as of today, chef de mission. Let's rewind to a young Anna in Queensland. Before you've even got on a bike, like before you've even before
we're going to go back that far.
We're going back that far. I'm just take us back to that that time and the point at which you discovered perhaps cycling and just what put you on that track.
I'm the baby of 4 in the Meares family, and my mum's rule was she wouldn't take 4 kids to 4 different sports. So the oldest got to choose who was the only boy in the family, my big brother Scott. And then my sisters Tracy, Carrie and I followed suit. So we were a very active family, very sporty, very outdoorsy family. And we did everything from BMX, karate, tennis, triathlon, swimming, cross country, you name it. If it was sport, we did it. We're in 2 pairs, 6 years apart in the sibling setup. So once my older siblings, Scott and Tracy, moved out of home, Kerry and I were doing what nearly everyone does when the Commonwealth Games comes on TV. You sit and you cheer on the Australian team. And we saw Kathy Watt win gold for Australia, and it was just this iconic image where she rode a bike that had the Australian flag on it. She carried the flag over her head when she won the race, and we had already been through bike sports like BMX, loved it. We grew up in the country where we had the freedom to move around the town any way we liked, and Mum and Dad sure as hell weren't going to drive us to our mate's place, so bikes were quicker to get there than to walk. So we lived on bikes. And so it was probably a pretty natural progression to find a competitive sporting avenue where bikes happened or occurred. So I was 11 watching those Commonwealth Games in 1994. Excuse me. Kerry and I went into Mackay. I was going to say drove to Mackay, but mum drove us, let's be fair. And just fell in love with it. I wasn't good at it in any sense, because as a young kid, you physically develop at very different rates. I was probably more suited to endurance cycling. Kerry was more suited physically to sprint cycling, but I found road cycling boring. I lived in the country. It was a tree, kangaroo, shrub, tree, kangaroo. So the fact that you could actually just go fast for 100 or 200 meters was really exciting to me.
Yeah. And at what point did you realise, oh, hang on. So you said, 11 or 12, you weren't very good. But at what point did you go, actually, I'm pretty good? And there was it was more than just, those throwaway lines that kids often have, like, oh, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. When did you realise that, no, you could be this and you were going to be this?
For me, I reckon I was 16, 17. I won the Junior World Championships. I thought the Olympics could be a possibility. I was on the cusp of qualifying for my first Commonwealth Games. And in our sport, you had to be a minimum age of 18 or the year you turned 19 to compete internationally. So I was a bit of a late bloomer in that sense, but I was always capable of reading race tactics very well. And because I wasn't physically competitive, I had to be smart with how I positioned myself in races. And so once my body caught up, I actually became a little bit of a weapon in that sense and progressed quite quickly when I had some muscle on my bones, some meat on my bones, so to speak. So I would say 16, 17, and I reckon it would have been in Pennsylvania, America, at that Junior World Championships.
So you were saying there, the fact that you weren't, physically as advanced as others, that actually gave you a bit of an advantage in the long run. Yeah. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Because you were actually starting to understand the technical side of it, the tactical side of it, understanding your own game, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
Whereas often, in a lot of sports, and I'm thinking of, a lot of sports I work in where physical prowess, those kids will take off, they'll have a big upsurge and then plateau. In many cases. And it sounds like it could be similar in your sport as well, where the ones, if they're willing, like you were, to stick with it, keep thinking tactically, it's, just the trend is more important than the is that fair to say? Like, if we
talent is talent is important. You can't ignore talent, and there is some exceptionally physically talented young kids out there. Absolutely. If they're let go too long without developing the other aspects of what is going to come into the holistic athlete in the big picture in the long term, then they will run into problems. Yeah. Where I think I was very fortunate is my first coach was Ken Tucker, Reggie, Mr. Tucker as I called him when I was 12. I quit cycling when I was 12 because I was just like, you know what, it's good, it's all right, I like it, but I was also academically inclined. So I started to go down the path of wanting to go to school more than I wanted to compete in cycling. And my sister Kerry, she was all in. So mum wasn't going to leave me at home. So every weekend I still had to go in with Kerry. So as I said on the sidelines, Mr. Tucker came over and he's like, why aren't you on a bike? I said, no, I'm done. Again, why aren't you on a bike? And every weekend he was at me, why aren't you on a bike? And I guess what he could see was there was just this little bit of mongrel in me in that I didn't like being beaten. And when he talked to me on the sideline, I could explain to him what was happening in a race. I could see it and understand it. And so up until that point, he'd not coached a girl. He'd only had boys in his squad. And he said, if you get back on the bike, I'll coach you. Now, Mr. Tucker coached his 3 boys and, they all did extremely well. Kenrick went to be a dual Commonwealth Games gold medalist in 78 and 82 and went to the Moscow Olympics in 80. So here I am looking at the Kenrick Tucker Velodrome and Mr. Tucker's offered to coach me. So I'm like, okay, I'll get back on a bike. Yeah. And he really, if I could put it in a nutshell, he coached my head until my body caught up.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating because it even now, we were just talking about this before we started recording, I'm working with a lot of athletes who are at the top of their game and they've not spent as much time in that space. You know, it has been down to physical prowess, talent. I just think it's, I mean, you know, obviously this podcast is really about trying to level that thinking. You know, we all know it's important. Like, you know, you go to any athlete, any coach, how important is the mental side of sport, and think, really, okay, well, how prevalent is it in your environment or in your training? Maybe not as much. So I think it's fascinating that you know, Mr. Tucker was able to spot that, you know, and value that as well. Not just look at the physical side of things, go, oh, well, not really worth my time. No, this person understands. I think that shows a real nuance probably in the way he thought about it.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and we'll probably get to it, but when you put, at the end of the day, you can have a situation where two athletes are physically, there's nothing that separates them. So what is it that makes one step up and succeed over the other? It's not necessarily the physical capability. It's the engine or the manual that's driving that body. Yeah.
Let's just stay in that period of your life for a minute. You've said your parents were like, okay, well, we're not taking 4 people to the 4 different sports. How much of an influence were they as parents / coaches / motivators, cheerleaders, champions, whatever way you think about how they showed up? What role did they have in helping you become the person you are? And not just in sport, but, you know, just in general, like.
Yeah, I mean, it was a hard upbringing in a lot of ways. We grew up in the country. We were a blue-collar family. We didn't have a lot of money. You know, we grew up in the era where, you did get a smack every now and then. It's not like today. So we were raised in a strict household. We were given opportunity. And when we found track cycling, you know, it was explained to Kerry and I that this was going to take a big commitment from mum and dad. You're either in or you're not. And if you're in, you stay in type thing. And so we understood that pretty quickly for having been 11 and 12. Dad probably was a bit more behind the scenes in working, making the money. You know, he's a full-time night shift worker. Every now and then he'd swap shifts with mum, you know, if the timing worked to do a drive into Mackay for us to get to the velodrome, which, to be honest, we hoped that mum would, because dad loved these self-help talk tapes that just, you know, you get into a daydream on that 3-hour drive and then you come out of it, you're like, no, go back to the daydream, And mum would play music. So we often hoped that it was mum that would pick us up from school. But when I reflect back on it now, I realise mum would drive 600k round trips every weekend for 2 years before they packed up, took a package from the mines, moved to Rockhampton, moved to a whole new town, bought a new house, put us into a new school, bought a barbecue chook shop. Both of them ran that and us as a family for 7 years. It was open 365 days a year. It wasn't shut a single day. I remember the days when my mum was just, her feet hurt, her back hurt, she had a headache. She worked through hernia, migraines, because every cent they could save of them working in that shop was more money that could go into the sport for us. And I felt bad, and I'm like, Mum, just don't get up today. She's like, no, you get up every day. And it obviously would have taken a toll. I don't know what now that I'm a parent, I don't know what it was like to get the phone call when I broke my neck. I didn't realise how stressful it was to sit in a stand at an Olympic Games and have no ability to affect the outcome and just sit there and watch despite every dedication and effort that they'd put into. I had no idea that mum and dad wanted 2 kids, not 4. I had no idea that they had plans for life, and then the last 2 kids chose the most expensive sport apart from equestrian, you know, and completely upended their life plans. So, you know, those perspective moments have happened sporadically through my life and career, but more so now. But I'm grateful too, because as a kid, I just had fun. I never thought my parents had to grow up. I never thought they got tired. I never thought that there was stress where the money was coming from or anything like that. So there was an element of awareness, but there was an element of protection from it too.
Yeah. And it strikes me that, you know, when people would think of you as a competitor, there's a lot of those values which were probably subconsciously instilled about, you just get up, you just do it, you just train, you just work. There is no compromise here. We're just going to make it happen. And we've spoken numerous times, and I remember two stories you've shared with me in the past. One, not so much a story, more of a proclamation that you never really played sport for fun. Like it was all just, I mean, it was fun, but it was only fun if it was, we're all in. And so I'd like you just to sort of maybe reflect on that, as well as the story you told about when you were swimming and your father's going down the sideline, basically lying to you in order to make you swim better.
That's it. I forget the stories I've told you. So I would have been, this was before cycling, and swimming was one of the sports that we were doing. And I was in a race, and my dad realised I was winning, and I knew I was winning because it was backstroke, and I could see where everyone was, and he could tell that I wasn't actually going at my full capacity. So he's come over and he goes, "Come on, you're losing. There's someone else up there." And I was like, "Oh my God, I mustn't have seen them." So I've actually gone even harder and won by a bigger distance than I otherwise would have. And then I got out of the pool and he goes, "You weren't even trying. You've always got to be trying, even if you are better than anyone else. There's a capacity and a level for you to reach." And he thought that was a bit cheeky on my part. And the other one,
so let's just stay there for a minute, because we're when you're thinking about that, like, this really does speak to this idea of, and it sounds a little odd when I'm speaking to someone who is objectively the best at what they did, but it really is it's that nuance between just being the best versus no, what are we capable of here, and really going to that edge and finding out what we're capable. And there we're talking about a kid, I don't know, 9, 10 in a swimming pool. But if we take that principle and apply it to anyone, like, I think sometimes athletes, teams, they get sucked into that comparative. Well, okay, well, that, everyone's struggling a little bit at the moment, or they're doing this or they're not doing that, and it's almost like I wouldn't go as far to say it's an excuse, but perhaps it breeds a bit of a complacency, which maybe your dad maybe not so subtly was trying to guard you against. You can be more.
Yes.
How does that sit with you?
I think you're very right. And long term, the appreciation of that made me realise that it's one thing to try being number one. It's another thing when you become number one. You have a benchmark when you're trying, and you are the benchmark when you are number one. So you have to be the person who is accountable from that moment forward, because you're constantly raising the glass ceiling or the bar and trying to break that glass ceiling. So, and that happened significantly throughout my career, where there were times where I pushed myself beyond what other people thought was achievable because I knew of my capacity. And there are a few moments, I'm sure, that we'll go through where I realised this. That was probably the first one, where, you don't have to just do enough sometimes. You because when competition comes into it, there's a level of attempting to be better than you have ever been in order to try and be the best. And that's a really important relationship. You can't have one without the other. And if you operate under trying to be your best, you're never going to be the best.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, in sports like yours, we have the idea of the PB, and often most athletes are trying to hit PBs when it counts. Is that fair to say? So the training, the mental approach, everything is geared towards bringing our best in that moment in order to be the best. That's not an oversimplification, or is it?
No, well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because ultimately you want your best performance when it counts and when you need to have your best performance. But on the day, sometimes shit just doesn't come together. So what are all the skill sets that you have to be able to pull your composure in, to be able to back yourself in the preparation that you've done in that moment? And sometimes on the day, it's just being better than your opponent. Executing better than your opponent, because you've already done all the work to get to that point. It may not be perfect in its execution. You just have to execute better than your opponent. So then when you bring that back to normal behaviors every day, is then how do you replicate that for the environment of competition?
Yeah, and that's it, right? Consistency is an everyday almost by definition, it's an everyday thing. In to what extent? Let's just riff on this. To what extent do you hold it? Because I have a sort of way of thinking about this where. Let's say, for example, we want an athlete to really have good attention to detail. Or be focused. Stay present, stay in the moment. One of the ways that athletes might think about that is, we're only thinking about that in my sport. The way I think about it is that we can train that ability to have attention to detail or stay focused in lower stakes environments, like, for example, in a conversation. Let's be really present here.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that then obviously equates to being able to stay present in a clutch moment in sport, but my guess is it helps. It's like a marginal gain that if I can develop that. And so when we're thinking about diligence or attention to detail or doing the little things, a lot of the athletes or teams I work with, we'll talk about trying to get that in multiple areas of our life, not just in the sporting world.
Absolutely. The more that you can live the lifestyle, the more auto behavior occurs, especially when you're under pressure, and instinct becomes the thing that takes over. What a lot of athletes tend to do, and it's understandable, is that there is such a requirement in terms of the structured, routine, focused, detailed, dedicated environment, is that they switch it off to be able to have some reprieve from that. And so I guess it's an individual preference and what actually is going to work for each individual. Me, loved being able to live the lifestyle. Others, not always. And so it's, for me, it just became a best practice thing, where when you start to talk about the Olympic Games, it's an abnormal environment, right? So how do you make an abnormal environment normal? Is you take into it the behaviors that are consistent for you for survival in that environment to allow you to operate at the best capacity.
You mentioned there, switching off. Some athletes like to switch off, and I think, we talk a lot about that, about being mindful and deliberate about when we're switching off. So it's not just a mindless, I'm out of the environment. But I think that's a skill in itself. I think athletes learn that, and again, that's all part and parcel of understanding your own game. You knew that you needed that. Whether your counterparts knew what they needed, maybe not. But I think, that mindful and deliberate approach, not just in the sport but out of it, critical.
And there are some things that I think, for me, I was happy to pull out of the sporting environment and bring into life, and there were other things that I wasn't. I was very well known for being intimidating and aggressive and on the front foot, and that steely glare.
That's what I'm getting now, by the way.
But
go on. Sorry.
Those were parts of my capability of being, my personal traits, the things that I could switch on that I didn't want in my everyday life. But there were behaviors that I did want in my everyday life that were choices that, cost me maybe some friendships and relationships along the way. But again, they were my choices. So.
We'll definitely talk about that shortly. So let's bring up the Olympic Games. Let's start. 2004. You'd already been, I think I'm right in saying, you were already world champion.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, so come on. World champion role.
No pressure.
No pressure, right? How old?
20.
20 years old, world champion, rolling into your first Olympics. Surely it's a walk in the park. But take me through, because obviously I'm being flippant. I'd like you to think, just share with us how you prepared for that, because world champions or world championships in cycling, and I may be stretching it here, but probably not the eyeballs that an Olympic Games gets. Like Olympic Games, everyone in, especially in a sports crazy country like Australia, eyeballs are on it. Take me through what a 20-year-old needs to do to bring their best in that moment when it counts.
Okay. The World Championships were in Melbourne in 2004 in May. So Home World Championships has its own pressures, right? I was pretty good, but I wasn't great. I was midfield in the 500. I rode a personal best, 34:34. And as it turned out, every woman who went after me in that time trial, because you only start one rider at a time, did not surpass the time, did not surpass the time, did not surpass the time. So I was going from 9th to 8th to 7th to 6th to all of a sudden I've got a medal because there's 2 more people to go. Like, oh my gosh. To last rider on the track and like sitting there, sweaty palms and rocking and going, holy shit, like what's happening right now? And no rider surpassed the time. So I became world champion at the age of 20 at home, riding a personal best time. However, that world title got me not just a selection into the Olympic Games, but what it meant was at the Olympic Games, I was going to be the last rider. So just to help, so the protocol is the current world champion goes last in that. So the story you just told, you went fairly out early, very early, and so it was a waiting game. Here, completely different waiting game because you were going to go last. So the idea is that the anticipation builds because each rider should get faster by the time you get to the last participant. So my hands are sweaty just thinking about it. My coach at the time, Martin Barras, was quite aware that, not that I was an anomaly, but there was going to have to be a lot of work in preparation because physically I had the capability, but I had no idea what that Olympic environment was going to be like. So after having qualified and about 2 months out from the Games, I sat with him and my sports psychologist at the time, who was Georgia Ridler. And he just said to me, I'm going to run you through a visualization of what it might be like for you. I'd already done my warm-up. I was sitting on the side of the track about to go into the start gate to do some practice of the first standing quarter lap. 500 metres is 2 laps on the track. He said, George is just going to talk you through it. Close your eyes. I'm going to give you my final words of advice, and then we're going to put you in the gate. So I closed my eyes and George is running me through, you've done your warm-up at the Olympic Games, you're wearing the green and gold colours, you've got your boots on, your gloves on, your helmet, everything. What does that feel like? What's this touch on your skin? Now you can see the crowd. What are the colours in the crowd? Are there flags? Are there cameras? Are there mascots? How is it full? Do you see the cameras? Are there flashes? What's the noise like? What's the buzz like? How many athletes are around you? And just started to paint this picture that was so detailed that I got nervous. And
as she's talking, telling you that you're actually feeling it.
I actually find it harder to breathe. I start to want to move in my chair. My legs get heavy. My hands are starting to clench. I actually want to open my eyes because I can feel physically stressed. And this is all just from an imagination in my head of what the environment might
mad.
Look
so
like.
You're saying that you want to break out of this visualization.
Because it was intense. It was overwhelming.
Wow.
And then when they did allow me to open my eyes, Marv, my coach, was right in front of me. And he said, right, last ride of the Olympics, 34:1 to beat. Now, 34:1 was an important time because the world record was 34:0. The Olympic record was 34:1. And my personal best was 34:34, which I had ridden at that world title. So he believed the time required to win the Olympic Games was going to take an Olympic record. And he hadn't given me a heads up on this. Right. So all of a sudden I open my eyes and I not only have I got this visualization in my head, but now I've got this piece of information that's quite overwhelming that I've got to lift to a level I've never been before. And I was distracted. I couldn't find focus and I was nervous. I got in the gate and over a 65-meter distance, it was one of the worst starts I'd done in my life, all based off of what I thought that game's experience was going to be like. And I just came off the track and I just said, oh my gosh. And they said, it's really powerful, isn't it? I said, it's powerful. And they said, we're going to do this every day. Every time you have a start session, we're going to run this exact same scenario. So I became familiar with the scenario. I became familiar with my physical response. I became familiar with and working with the psych, understanding that, okay, if I get this physical response, how do I mentally accept it? You're not going to dissipate it, but how do I mentally accept it and continue to walk into that environment? And in the 2-month period, it got to a point where it became normal. And then come the Olympic Games, I remember I warmed up away from the pit deliberately because I knew what to expect. And the nerves were very clearly there because as I'd finished warm-up, I got back to the centre of the track. My bike had already been set up by the mechanics. I forgot my gloves, and I've gone to Mum, I forgot my gloves. So he's run down and he's got my gloves. And then I'm like, Mum, I forgot my number. So he's like, run down and got my number. And then I turn around and go, Mum, I forgot my glasses. And he's like, oh my gosh.
Come on.
He's turned around and all of a sudden he's stopped and he's come back and he's like, you don't need glasses. You've got a visor on your helmet. So clearly the nerves were there.
Yeah.
And I remember walking with him up into the marshalling pit to sit down in the same capacity in the same place that I had done in the Adelaide Superdrome, but now in the Athens Velodrome. And I didn't take my eyes off him. The sound sensory was overwhelming enough, but he was my constant and he was my normal point.
Yeah.
And I saw this red flash go past and I knew that it was fast because the crowd went nuts. Yeah. And this red flash went past again, and this was Jinji, who was a Chinese rider who had gone before me, the penultimate rider. And I was watching Marv, and this smile came over his face, and he just turned from the scoreboard and he looked at me and he said, Ms. Anna, last ride at the Olympics, 34-1 to beat. And all of a sudden, the confidence that came over me and the weight that came off my legs, and I remember taking a deep breath and almost smiling back.
Yeah.
And I don't remember much of the race. There are points of the race that I remember, but not much. And sure enough, Jinji had ridden an Olympic record. And as history would show, I wouldn't just ride the Olympic record, but world record, 33.952.
Yeah. Becoming the first woman to break the 34 mark.
First woman to ride sub 34.
Yeah. That story, I mean, you said your hands were against it, but my hair's standing up here because it's an incredible example, and the way you articulated it, you know, like before you spoke about how do we make abnormal environments normal. Well, it's obviously you're not going to go and live in Athens for 3-4 months out and do that, but the way you're able to create that in your head, I'm fascinated. I was wondering actually, you know, when you said you did the visualization for the first time and you had a terrible lap or a terrible 65 meters. Was there any part of you which went, well, visualization doesn't work, obviously? You know what I mean? Like, was there any point you went, well, this is shit, I'm not doing this again, look at what it's done to me? Or were you a bit more evolved?
No, I was a bit...
Yeah.
The visualization wasn't to find improvement in a technique or a feeling or a stroke or a position or anything like that. The visualization was to understand the environment and the impact the environment could have just by every effort that I would physically put in. Yeah. Right. So I understood that right from the get-go. So I was in some ways in awe and shocked by the impact an environment that's out of my control could have on the things that were in my control. Yeah, yeah. So I was very open-minded, and I really liked the fact that every time I got to sit, maybe it's just in my meticulous nature, but I was in, I bought in so hard, and that's important. And then that,
when you say, okay, last rider up, 34-1 to win, that just becomes this mantra, this trigger. This, okay, we're on. Yeah. And is that fair? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's cool because that just resonates so much with, what I try and help athletes create is all that stuff you've just said. There's so much stuff we can't control, but that if we can have an inner dialogue, or in this case, having someone outside who's we've worked together on this, like if he'd have just said that to you for the first time, we can hypothesize how it might have played out, but the fact that this is so normal, we've prepared for this and we are ready to go.
Yeah, and he knew it. Yeah, and he knew it.
Yeah. I just love that. So, okay, so Athens. I mean, how easy cycling? World champion, world champion by 20, Olympic champion, world record in your first Olympics. I mean, come on. So another few years pass, and into 2008, which doesn't get off to the greatest of starts.
No.
So 2008. So you obviously Beijing Olympics coming around. You're the reigning Olympic champion.
Yeah.
And I've just got to go to the my reference here, because this is how your 2008 starts. Just 7 months out from the Olympics, I'm just quoting here from the Australian Hall of Fame website, by the way, that you're in. Just 7 months out from the Olympics, Meares crashed in a World Cup competition in LA. Her resulting injuries included torn ligaments, bruising, a dislocated shoulder, and a fractured C2 vertebrae, which was a mere 2 mils from a clean break. So most people listening would think, okay, well, Olympics this year, maybe give it a miss. Probably going to be on your back for a while, recuperating. How long did you spend before, how much time did you give yourself before you got back on the bike?
10 days.
10 days. So, this is what was popping off in my head when you were telling me about your mum. Just get up every day, Anna.
Yeah.
Get up. Broken vertebrae, no dramas, get up. That's abnormal.
Yeah, well, I think youth and naivety helped me at the time, if I'm honest, because despite the injury, I actually felt okay. It was learning the severity of the injury that tripped me up mentally and emotionally, because I was struck by fear and doubt. I didn't know that I was 2 mil from a clean break at my neck C2 level until I overheard a conversation between my coach and the doctors, where the doctor said, I don't know if you're religious, but God has other plans for this woman. And
that's what you heard?
That's what I heard.
Wow. Yeah.
And I understand why they didn't want to tell me, because I knew at the C2, clean break means respirator for the rest of your life as a quadriplegic, or the other option is death. So at 23 years of age, that's two pretty profound things to have to wrap one's head around. And I was really scared. Like, I will genuinely say fear hit me hard. I started to doubt everything. I started to question my whys, my whats, my whos, my wheres, my everything. So probably in some ways I started to play a bit of a victimized mentality. Why me, poor me? It's not fair type thing. So I was talking to Marv in this context, and this is probably why coaches, I think, are one of the most underrated, underappreciated positions, because they don't just write a program to make an athlete physically capable. They really fill a lot of roles, including psychologists. And he said to me, look, you're asking the right questions, but you're using one wrong word. Don't ask what if, ask what is. And the difference between the two has been the biggest lesson I learnt today. What if is great for contingency planning, but in situational response, it's driven by our emotions and our fears and doubts of what we don't want to have happen. And when you put your focus and interest into the things you don't want to have happen, you end up following the path and making decisions that guide you there anyway. And so it's a really hard thing to, despite fear, sit in the is, which is the tangible reality information that's in front of you, and make the decisions that can get you out of the situation you're in. So I went from the what if of being fearful of 2 millimeters because it could have cost me my life to being utterly grateful because that 2 millimeters saved my life. And I started to track down the what is path as a result of the talk that I had with my coach. And I got really frustrated with people constantly telling me what I couldn't do. And so to him and my team, I said, instead of telling me what I can't do, tell me what I can do right now. What can I do right now? I don't care if it's just walking up a stair. I don't care if it's, moving my feet while I'm lying in my bed. What can I actually do? And so that changed their perspective on how they could help me through the rehabilitation. And one thing I didn't realize until I broke my neck was how heavy my head was. And I couldn't actually lean on the handlebars of my bike and support the weight of my head. So they were happy for me to get on a bike and pedal if I was perpendicular and supported. And so they just set up this portable self-adjustable clothes rack around my ergo at home, and I just sat there with people around me to hold me, and I just pedaled. And that's what started the whole process of rehabilitation.
When did it become apparent that, because there must have been a period where you thought, you're not going to the Olympics.
The moment the doctor came in and said I'd broken my neck, was the moment I realised Beijing was gone. Yeah,
and what was the gap then before you thought, maybe there's a chance?
Well, he came in at about 10:30.
Yeah,
I crashed at 5 in the afternoon. Doctors came in at 10:30. Marv left at 2, and at 2. Before he left, I grabbed him with my left hand, which was the only thing I could move at the time, and I said to him, I'll still be right for Beijing.
Yeah, wow.
So 4 hours.
Did you genuinely believe that?
Yeah. I was just not prepared to let it go.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I'd been there in Athens before. I knew what it was like. I knew what it was like to be at the absolute top. I wasn't sure that I could still do it, but I was desperate to at least try.
Yeah.
And I think he thought the morphine was talking at the time, because he's like,
it may have
we'll
contributed.
talk about that a little bit later. But by the time I got home from America, he had already been at home with the team.
Yeah.
And, you know, Beijing wasn't going to move its start date to accommodate my injury. I had to walk a different path.
Yeah.
By the time I got home, that ergo was set up.
Yeah.
So I was straight on it.
And that was 6 or 7 months out?
It was 7 months from accident to Beijing.
Yeah. And how many months out from Beijing were you like, I'm good to go here? Not only am I going, but I'm going to compete here.
I could turn my head 4 weeks before the games, and I was advised to stay on my bike during the games.
Yeah, don't come off it.
Don't come off your bike.
So, you know, you think about that, or what did you have to do mentally to, did you think about the possibility of crashing? Like, how did you keep that from clouding your focus?
Yeah. In terms of, there's a lot here. It moved very quickly, as you can imagine. You go from broken neck to the Olympic Games in 7 months. There's a lot that moves very, very quickly. Yeah. And by the time I was allowed to get onto the velodrome, it was probably 10, 12 weeks after my fall. Yeah. Brace came off at 10 weeks, so I needed to start getting some muscle back in the upper body to support the weight of my head. Yeah. And it was the first time I walked back into the velodrome, and I got to the door and I physically froze, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I was looking around, and I was a bit perplexed, and Marv saw it and he said, "That's enough for today, go home." Yeah. And I was like, "No, but I want to get it. I'm finally allowed to get on the," and he's like, no, that's enough for today, go home. And I was, I was angry. Yeah. I was angry. I'm like, I was just allowed to come here, and now I'm going to go home. Yeah. And then I again worked with my psychologist and understood that there was this physical response happening, because last time I walked into that environment, I got very hurt. Yeah. So my body's like telling me, get out and run. Yeah. But my head's saying, no, I want to go in. So I was having this battle in myself because of the environment. And so I had to allow myself some time to win that battle, to walk in the door, to walk down the ramp, to see the bike, to get on the bike, to get on the velodrome, to ride next to someone, to, you know, it was real baby step stuff, and it took weeks. It wasn't a slow process. It took weeks. But it was important to do, because otherwise that block would come at a later point when I didn't have the time to do it. Yeah. It's kind of like if you burn your hand on a pot, you want to test it a couple of times next time before you commit to it. Yeah. You know, that real kind of, I don't want to get hurt again. So that's kind of what I went through. And because I feel because I did that, I was able to psychologically cope with the potential of a fall occurring again. Yeah. I had to trust myself. It was one fall that I'd had it was the biggest fall that few falls that I'd had in my whole career up until that point. Yeah. I'd ridden a bike thousands and thousands and thousands of times before. Yeah. So I had to find that confidence in those abilities.
Use the
rather
evidence.
Than the one.
Yeah. So you get to the Beijing, and how did that play out in terms of your events?
Quite well. Qualified strong, made it through the rounds, got to the semi-finals, met with Shuang Guo of China, home favourite, in the semi-final.
She was the red flash in the previous story.
She was the next generation of red flash.
Right.
And she was formidable. Like she was as aggressive as I was, and I loved and hated racing her at the same time. Yeah. You know, she crashed. She fell at one point. We collided at another point. There was relegations. It was chaos. Yeah. There was one point where I almost crashed and I went cold from head to toe. Yeah. And
because you went cold from head to toe, like because of the fear, you mean?
No, it was just almost...
It was just a physical reaction.
You know that moment in the movie Wimbledon when he's about to serve for the match, and then all of a sudden he's thinking about, did I turn the oven off?
Yeah.
And it was almost like that. Like my elbow got lifted by her leg, and it was just tipping, and it was just that my front wheel bit the track enough to balance me back appropriately. And in that time from front wheel off the track to front wheel back on the track, I was kind of like thinking, okay, where am I at right now? What's about to happen? That track floor is right there.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing what runs through your head at certain times. it was almost like the biting of the front wheel woke me up from that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I was able to surpass Shuang Guo and make it to the final against Victoria Pendleton, where I was just physically not a match. Interestingly, and I haven't said it too many times, but when I made that final, my high performance director, my coach, they all came up to me beforehand and said there was a lot of thank yous. Like, we were a sport majorly under pressure at those games. No one had won a medal in any discipline. And I was able to, despite what was to come in the final, bring home a medal. Yeah. So there was some real perspective and gratitude and moments that were pretty profound before I even got on the bike for that final with Vicky Pendleton. Yeah. So it's hard to lose a race to win a silver. Yeah. And I must admit, disappointed that I couldn't compete like I wanted to. Yeah. You just can't take away from how good she was, and she deserved that win. And I think it didn't take me long to realise it was just sheer relief. I'd been so dogged from the day I got home from the hospital to the day I took a breath after that race that I hadn't really looked around to appreciate what I'd been through and where I had got and what I had achieved. Yeah. And time has probably given me more appreciation of what that was.
I was going to ask that because in the moment, I mean, I can see it in your face even now when you sort of silver, like silver at an Olympic Games. Like,
everyone wants to win. That's the thing.
Of course.
Yeah.
But with the benefit of hindsight and time, to just track the story you've just told us from, nearly being on a respirator or dead. Yeah. To actually being back in the arena at the highest level against
she was the best.
The best.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to say that.
No, arguably. There was no arguing about it.
Okay. Yeah. Against the best in the world. Yeah. And that's a victory by any measure, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I do remember a few years later when Vicky did an interview as a part of a story piece that was coming together for my latter part of career. She said that had she have been in my shoes, that would be the most significant achievement for her. Yeah. So that was really nice. Yeah.
So let's go then. Was that the start of your real? Would you see that as the start of the rivalry with Vicky, or had it been brewing before then?
It started in 2005, 2006.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So it had already well and truly been brewing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it came to a real point, I guess, in 2012 in London. Yeah. For those, obviously I'm English. And what England...
You like me now, don't you?
Yeah, now, only just. But what England do, probably... One thing I think England do slightly better than Australia in sports, not many things, but this is one thing, is that they really do the pomp and ceremony around English athletes, right? No one builds... Like, we think we've got tall poppy syndrome here and build people up, but in England, it's just different level, to the point where her nickname in England was Queen Victoria, Home Olympics... Vicky Pendleton, Anna Meares. You just said, there was no arguing about it. In 2008, she was the best. You've already said you don't like losing. Yeah. You weren't competing to lose. Let's put it that way. It wasn't just for the fun of it. You were there to win. Yeah. I know the story about how you went about tackling this, and it's one of the great... I just love it. I use it as an example with so many different athletes I work with, but I'd love you just to take us through the Know Thy Enemy project. Yeah. Which sounds a little bit cold, a little bit clinical, but if you could just take us into that, like where it came from, what it entailed, and ultimately the way it prepared you to ruin the Olympic Games in England.
I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry.
No, of course not.
Absolutely. So, Know Thy Enemy project was born by Gary West, who was my coach at the time. May he rest in peace. He passed away from MND in 2017. And Know Thy Enemy was spurred from the samurai, in that the enemy wasn't your competitor, it was yourself. So how does one better yourself in an environment of competition and warfare in a lot of ways is to understand your opponent so that you can upskill yourself to be able to survive, right? So my coach has taken this philosophy and he's going, right, we're going to do Know Thy Enemy against Victoria Pendleton, because if we want to go from silver against the best in the world to making that gold in a 4-year period, we have to change the process and application that's happening in between, because if we repeat the same process and application, we're likely going to repeat the same outcome. So the goal was to change the outcome. Then what do we have to change in between? And when you impart change makes you uncomfortable, because it moves you from what you are used to and and it moves you into a space of what you don't know, and therefore you become uncomfortable. So Gary and his team and my team made me feel very familiar with being uncomfortable in the 3.5 period that we started this between Beijing and London. And to enact change, you have to understand the problem that you're trying to create a resolution for. So my problem was Victoria Pendleton, because she was the best in the world. So I did nothing, but my team looked at 300 hours of race footage of Victoria Pendleton and broke her down to statistical data. And statistical data basically because the emotion was in the rivalry. And for me, working and talking about and understanding Victoria, it invoked emotion. Emotion clouded my ability to see the information my team were trying to get me to understand that I required to upskill myself, right? Yeah. So being a visual learner, they knew that pie graphs, line graphs were a good way to be able to present this information to me. So we broke it down to looking at preferential behaviour, avoidance behaviour, those sorts of things. And what became very, very clear was she was very predictable in her choices of behaviour and her avoidances. And she was so good at having her opponents in front of her that in that situation, she won 95% of her races. Yeah. And on the few occasions where we saw where she was in front of her opponent, that success rate dropped significantly. Yeah, wow. So we realised, like everyone else in the world, we were trying to beat her at her best game and no one was achieving it. So we realised we had to flip the table and get her out of her strongest, most practiced position and get her in a least practiced position and execute her. That was my best chance to beat her in that position. So we realised that there were a number of skill sets that could allow me to do this. I was a very capable rider in the front position. I now had to become a very capable rider in the back position. I had to do it very strategically so that her and her team didn't necessarily see the pieces coming together.
Because would you be practicing or trying to implement this in other races, right?
Yes.
Which are obviously being documented, filmed. Yeah.
Everyone's got their videographers and their statisticians and all that.
So you're trying to change the way you ride in plain sight, really?
Yes, very much so. Yeah. So there were some competitions where my coach would say to me, every single race, I don't care where you draw, front or back, you race at the front. And another race he would say, I don't care where you draw, race at the back. And then he says, whatever you draw, you hold that position. So there became a change in behavior from me that was subtle but not necessarily glaring. Yeah. And then there became a point where when I raced Victoria Pendleton, I always raced the position that I drew. And there was one point a year and a half out from London at the World Championships. We met in the semi-final in Apeldoorn in Holland. And we tried the track stand, which is a common skill in track cycling. It's literally just coming to a stop, balancing the bike in a stationary position if you're in front, to force the rider from the back to the front. Yeah. The reason we chose this race, because it was high pressure. We had an opportunity in a dress rehearsal scenario to see if I could perform the skill, but also if she could perform the skill. Yeah. And it was pretty clear that she couldn't perform this skill. And it was the first time that I would beat Victoria at a World Championships and be world champion. So we're kind of like half celebrating, but also a little nervous because we've just shown our hand a year and a half out from the Olympic Games. And her team have the ability to create a counter strategy for the strategy that we're going to employ for London. So we have a counter strategy for the potential counter strategy of the strategy to not show the strategy again, right? So for the next 18 months, domestically or internationally, no one sees me do that skill or that type of race again. Yeah, wow. But every day at training with my teammate Alex Bird, I'm performing that. Yeah. And I'm looking for ways to execute it that's not normal in terms that it's easy to do a track stand on the straight, which is the flattest part of the velodrome. It's easy to do a track stand on the right foot looking forward because that's the strongest balance position of the bike. So I started to practice it left foot, right foot, looking forward, looking backwards, closed eyes, hopping the bike, just getting excessively familiar. Yeah. And then we realized that the hardest place to do the track stand was on the steepest part of the banking. And if she was aware that the track stand is a card that I could pull, then I needed to be able to perform it at the most difficult part of the track. So a couple of times we tried it. I toppled over. I hit the fence, which in race scenarios you get a warning, and then you have to lead in that position. You can't change.
Right.
So it's about I think 4 weeks before the London Olympic Games. I'm in Montechiari in Italy with Alex, who's there, and my coach comes to me and he goes, "We're going to try it." And it's the first time I pull it off, and we are just, everyone's like so excited because no one outside this team knows what's coming. Not even my own parents. So we go to London, and by this time the rivalry hype was intense. You know, I get heckled by the customs officer. I'm followed by paparazzi. Wherever I go, I'm booed wherever I go. And, you know, I'm really villainized in the media. And which again was its own psychological preparation that I did with my team.
So you prepared for that? You anticipated that was coming?
Absolutely.
Because the British press is like
brutal.
Awful, aren't they?
Brutal. And you know, I set up a press conference in the hotel in Italy, and I got every bloke in my team in front of me, and I said, "Don't hold back. Whatever you think might hurt me, give it to me. Let me try and, you know, talk my way through it and be prepared for that." So anyway, long story short, Victoria and I make the final, and it's a best of 3 matchup. And this is where predictability is dangerous, because if you're predictable, you're ultimately beatable, right? So we were banking on the predictability of not just the behaviour of Victoria Pendleton, but the analysis behaviour of her and her staff as well. First race, she draws the front, perfect, don't do anything, lose the race by 1/1000th of a second. Which is crushing. But I knew how that race panned out.
Like 1/1000. I'm just trying to think, like a photo finish. Like, what are we talking?
Can't pick it.
It's a cigarette paper or something. It's like
the width of a lead pencil line drawn on a piece of paper in the photo finish.
In the photo, exactly.
So I came off the track and I said to my coach, "I can win this." And he's just like, it's like his mouth just hits the floor, and he's like, "I know." I'm like, no, you don't understand. I can win this. I've still got 2 races. I've got it covered. So there was no panic. There was no fear of having lost the first round. There was no pressure. I felt extremely confident just with the way that first race moved. And then the relegation came, and Pendleton was relegated for an impeded move on the home straight, where commissaires believed had the collision between us, which is allowed, but not whilst crossing certain safety lines on the track. Had it not have occurred, momentum would have carried me forward for the win. So at the home Olympics of Victoria Pendleton in a home crowd, she was relegated, and I was given, and there was an immense amount of booing. An immense amount of booing.
Not much nuance in a home crowd.
And so we go up for race 2 about 15, 20 minutes later. And this is where positions reverse. I'm now in the front position. I have the first race win. I know that psychologically the relegation is going to shake her a bit, but I know she's got a good team around her. She's the best in the world. We let her go up on the track first, which is a little story that I got from John Eales around how to deal with, you know, home crowds and
which is
pressure.
Cool. Share that, because I know where you got that story from and where it comes from.
So John Eales was a mentor of the team, and he came to our hotel training camp. And my now husband, who was a sports scientist at the time, said, "This is a guy you could talk to about how to, you know, survive in hostile environments." And so I asked him, you know, how did you deal with the Kiwi haka and the All Blacks to remain composed and go out and compete and succeed? And he told me a story about how he got slandered by the crowd, and the haka overwhelmed emotionally the team, and in the first half they'd just get overrun, and then they'd get ripped by the coach in the locker room, and they'd come out, you know, and they'd make ground up. So he realised he needed to be able to buy time for himself and the team between the haka and the start of the game. So they started facing the haka in their tracksuits, because it gave them an ability to take control of an environment that had very little control in it. And it made a level playing field again before the game started. So the hype of the haka was the Kiwi player, but the composure of the team was the tracksuit, because they could go off, take the suit off, huddle, have the last word, regain their composure, and then go out and play.
So you took this into that final.
So I took this into the final with Pendleton, in that, you know, 6,000 people doesn't sound like a lot in a stadium, but when it's magnified and sent down to just you and one other person, it's pretty immense. And so we made sure, my coach Gary and I made sure that despite if I was ready to go, I sat on the infield and waited for her to go on the track first. Now, it's not a long period of time, maybe 5, 6, 7 seconds. And we allowed her to be welcomed by the crowd, to be cheered by the crowd, to sit on that start line. And I just waited, listened to the dot points that my coach was giving to me, which was the agreed dot points from the practice of training.
Yeah.
And we waited for the pitch of the crowd to drop, because we realised then they were no longer focused on her, and the intensity of them was no longer going to impact me. And once the change of that crowd occurred, then I went onto the track, which meant she had to sit there much longer than otherwise she would have. We go into the race. She's anticipating a race that I've shown her for the last 18 months when I take the front position. She's aware that I can execute the track stand, but not at the steepest point of the track, not on the opposite foot, not in a standing position. And I was I remember just shaking so badly on my pedals. And I didn't perform it as well as I did in training. But the key here is, like I said earlier, I did it better than she did.
Yeah.
And when you have two people that are the best in the world, that's all it takes sometimes, is that execution is better than theirs.
Yeah.
And she rolled forward, and I just had this wave of confidence come over me.
Yeah.
I'm within my distance. I know I'm the world record holder over the 500-metre time trial. I know I've got the target in front of me now. I'm one race up. She's under pressure at a home Olympic Games. She's been relegated at the first race. She has no time to be able to go and talk to her coaches or her statisticians about this change of position. She has to make these decisions really, really quickly, which is why I love the sport that I was in. And it just played into my hand. She momentarily lost momentum of speed, which played into my strength of having a better acceleration, and I used it.
Yeah.
I got a bike length in front of her, and that's as much as I got. Yeah. And I won the bike race. Yeah. You know, and in physical context, in qualification, it was 800ths of a second that separated us. I should not have won by bike length. Yeah. And it was honestly the culmination of the physical, mental, and emotional preparation that I did, tactical execution as well, that I think got me the edge at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I love that it started with this idea of, you know, understanding the quest for that started inward. You know, like really starting to really understand your race even more so, be uncomfortable with that, and sit with that. So look, we've gotten over the Olympic. We've gotten over that. You know, Queen Victoria. We're past that. We're past that. So you know, Rio 2016 obviously would be a real landmark for yourself. You probably, I mean, I'm sure you knew that would be the last one. I'm right in saying, did you also carry the flag at Rio? You did, yeah. So the flag bearer. So obviously, you know, huge honours and milestones in your life. Just, you know, just take us into that. What it felt like knowing that this was coming to a close. You know, because for so long, since you were 11, it sounds like it's been pretty much a lot of who you are. And I'm curious about how you sort of made that transition. When that transition started, maybe.
The transition started in the warm-ups and warm-downs at training. Yeah. Because it was in the winter of Adelaide and it was cold, and I started to count down my last warm-up and warm-down. Right. And that is a big sign, you know, that it's the time's coming. Yeah. And I was more present and slower to look around in my last Olympics than I had been at any others. You know, I took moments when my team left the center of the track. I took moments to stand there on my own just to look around and realize I probably wouldn't be here again. Yeah. You know, just to try and burn those images into my head a little bit. Yeah. But at the same time, I was so ready to go. I was clawing to my last race. Yeah, right. My last race was my worst race in a decade. I got 10th at my last Olympics. My last race.
Your last race, but you also got a medal.
Yes, I got a bronze in the Kieran, which I'm so proud of. It's interesting perspective and what the measure of success is, and maybe it's because I've had so much success I can say this. I'm not sure. My goals for Rio changed in the time between London and Rio. I really came out of London believing that I had more capacity to improve, and I did. You know, there were some things that I wanted to achieve. I broke the world record in the 500 and was the first woman to not only ride sub 34 but sub 33, and that would happen over a 10-year period. I wanted to win another world title because I wanted to be outright the most successful in the world. Tick, yeah. So there were a lot of great achievements that happened in that time, but life happens, you know, and when personal life challenges impact the ability to focus professionally, that's really difficult. And I had a great team that made me feel safe in that environment, that gave me a place to go every day when life was just, you know, felt like it was falling apart. And then I just got tired, physically tired, mentally tired, emotionally tired. And Rio, carrying the flag for Rio for me, I think was the best thing that could have possibly happened. And I went from believing that I had more capability to win gold medals to my goal simply shifted to be the best you've ever been, win a medal, and come home happy, you know? And I achieved all of those things. I won a medal. I was the first woman to win a medal in the keirin at the Olympics for Australia. I was the first woman to medal in every sprint discipline at the Olympics as a result of that medal. And I didn't know until after that bronze medal I was the first Australian athlete from any sport to medal individually at 4 consecutive games, which when you think about it is a pretty amazing achievement. But when I came home, it was this general curiosity around why I was so happy, because it wasn't gold. They thought I'd be disappointed.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we forget how hard it is to win and how many people are in the competition, and that we should celebrate achievements along the way and success moments along the way. And along the way, I mean in that 2-week period of the Olympic Games. It's hard to make the team. There are a lot of people who don't make the team. It's hard to make a final. It's hard to bring more out of yourself and perform at a personal best. It's hard under pressure in those high intensity environments to think in a positive way for someone else and act in good sportsmanship and sportswomanship towards someone else. It's winning a silver, it's winning a bronze, it's winning a gold medal. It's my perspective on it has certainly changed immensely as a result of probably the longevity of my sport.
Which is interesting given the role that you have now,
and
how you will be taking media comments around what success looks like at the Olympics. Just to round this out, I'd like to just talk about that. You know, I sort of alluded to it before. For so long, cycling was, I'd imagine, would have contributed a lot to your sense of self, you know, who you were as a person. Just talk a little bit, because you said, you know, right at the start about how great it is for you now to be back in an environment where people are so. What was it like for you, you know, post retirement, and just trying to find out who you are without the bike?
It started off really fun. Really fun.
Yeah.
Like the first thing I did was write my retirement letter to every drug testing agency in the world. Because then I didn't have to, you know,
tell them where you were.
Tell them where I was. I'd done that for 14 years.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I could eat what I wanted to, drink what I wanted to, go where I wanted to, stay awake as long as I wanted to, be around whomever I wanted to. And it was fun. It was just this amazing breath of difference and energy input, and I was desperate for that. I really needed that, you know, to the point where one day for breakfast I ate a bowl of Cocoa Pops, a block of chocolate and a Lamington just because I could. You know, and I went from not having so many friends to, you know, missing out on weddings and birthdays and celebrations and having early nights to now they couldn't kick me out of their house. I was staying the night, you know, these sorts of things. And about 6 weeks into it, when the team got back together to start to prepare for the next Olympic cycle, and I wasn't a part of that, that's when I started to struggle. And that's when I started to realize, what am I going to do now? And how do I fill my day? And I had every plan in place to be busy and work, and, you know, the career education process that is so important, but no one told me about the mental and emotional disconnect and the grief that can come from no longer having a team and being in an environment that you're used to. And I was maybe a systemized athlete, being in the program for so long, but I started to question whether I was prepared to retire, because I realized I needed the routine and the structure, and I started to plan my days from the basics of putting on a load of washing to walking my dog to making a phone call to someone and actually having a structure to follow. And I realized that sport, when you're in it, is a really big world that runs like clockwork. There's a lot of attention. There's a lot of adulation. And the highs for me were incredibly high. And then I realized that life was a much bigger world with far less people who care and far less attention. And that's a bit of an admission on ego and pride. But normal felt low in comparison. And so trying to find the recalibration of what normal was after being in this world for 22 years and now not having that as a part of this world was really... I felt very lost and I struggled immensely. I was diagnosed with severe anxiety and grief, and the challenges of divorce and the death of my coach, Gary, added to that. My body, which was breaking down as a result of just being in sport for so long, it all compounded. It was very difficult. And so to pull myself out of it, obviously I got help. I worked with a psychologist, Rita Princey, who I'm utterly grateful for. My family and friends were so supportive and understanding, and just trying to find circles where I didn't feel like I was being interviewed, where I could feel like I could just talk shit and have some fun and be a part of the crowd was really important to that, to finding who I was. And then I started to meet a nice guy. And by this stage, I'd started to do foster care because I realized maybe I couldn't be a parent. So I wanted to I felt I had love that I could offer. So I was starting to foster children, and I had got to a point where I'm like, I'm going to foster children, buy a big block of land and rescue beagles. And that was where I was at. And then this man came back into my life, and he encouraged me to take up art and pottery, which I had loved as a kid, and just started to ask some questions that I hadn't really put perspective to. And he just said, if there was something in your life that you could do without any pressure or expectation, and you could do it, what would it be? And I'd be like, chef de mission for Australia. And he's like, why? I said, because I would be, leading that most motivated group of people you've ever come across in your life and positively impacting the next generation of athletes in an environment that I have loved for such a big part of my life. I would love that. So he said, fine, go out and find people, mentor, ask questions, upskill yourself. Petria Thomas ended up making a phone call to see if I'd be a general manager for the Birmingham Games in 22, which I jumped at as a volunteer. And through the Commonwealth Games, I met David Lepartier, who was the UCI president. Hadn't seen him since I retired. He invited me to the Wollongong Road World Championships, and I did an interview at the event there. And the last question that was asked was, "What does the future hold for you?" And I'd had 2 beautiful children with my now husband, and I said, "I don't know. I'm very happy where I am. I have a family that I am grateful for. I never thought I'd have children." And I've got my husband in the back of my head. Say it, put it out there. They don't know if you don't say it. So I don't know why. I just sat there and I said, look, that if the future has a chance for me to be chef de mission, I'd really like that. And I got a phone call the next day, and here I am, chef de mission for the Australian Olympic team.
There you go. Well, I mean, what an incredible journey. And the way in which you share it, not only is it, I think, really authentic, but it's also really useful. And I don't want that to downplay the authenticity of it, but I think people listening and watching, I think whether they're athletes, whether they're coaches, parents of athletes, there's so much in there that, just to be able to talk about, that can bring some of this stuff up for them. So, I mean, all the best. Within reason. I mean, as you know, the thing is now, as you know, I'm doing some stuff with different elements of the Olympic setup through the AIS. So it's an interesting one for me. I know more, about the Australian setup than I do the UK one. So yeah, go Aussie. Yeah. All the best for that. And of course, whatever the future holds, we'll obviously keep in touch. And
Absolutely.
I look forward to being a part of whatever's next for you post this. But let's get after it in Paris.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Cheers.